February 8, 2024, indications emerged that limited regulatory approval stalled Dangote Petroleum Refinery's plan to release aviation fuel, also known as Jet A1, and diesel for sale in the Nigerian market in January. But that has now changed as the refinery finally commenced the sale of diesel to marketers in the country, pegging a minimum of 1 million liters of automotive gas oil, also known as diesel, per marketer. Joining me for more on this is Bolade. Thank you, Bolade, for joining me today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right, I have with me Bolade Agboola, oil and gas analyst from Chapel Hill, Denham. Now, let me begin by asking you how the industry received this news and what it signals to players.
I believe it's a news that we have been expecting, and it's a positive one. And for context, the Dangote Refinery has a capacity of 650,000 barrels of oil per day. And if we look at that, it's like the largest single train refinery in the world. And it is estimated that at full capacity, it should, it should meet 100% of our demands for gasoline, diesel, and, aviation fuel.
I'd like you to take that again. You said it should meet 100%. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes, at full capacity.
All right. So all right. How strategic is Dangote Refinery's choice of, starting with AGO and Jet A1? More like, starting with the industrial arm.
I align a little bit to what you're saying. I understand it's a strategic move, but I also like us to look at it from another viewpoint, in the sense that there's been delays in supply of crude oil to Dangote Refinery. And if we look at the demand arm of things, the demand for PMS is much higher when compared to the demand for diesel. And so we would expect that the company will want to play in a space where they'll be able to make a much significant difference at the beginning of their production. So I believe that is why, there's been, they're starting with diesel first compared to PMS.
All right, so officials of this particular, multi-billion-dollar plant and even oil dealers have confirmed that the product was dispensed to marketers at between 1,225 naira per litre and 1,300 naira per litre. And that, of course, depends on the volume that one purchases. Now, with this, how much should we expect to get the product at the pumps, or are we beginning to see a decline in the price across the board?
Before I answer that question, I would just like to, go through it in stages. I will start with the fact that currently we import most of our diesel, and NNPC is selling currently at about 1,415 naira per litre. And if you look at it, refining, helps us to remove the impact of freight cost, insurance. Like domestic refining helps us to remove some of these costs out of the way, and we can clearly see it in the fact that Dangote is selling at about to marketers at about 1,225 to 1,003 per litre. And so if we look at that difference, we would expect that we assume that these prices that we have quoted is X marketers margin, and if it is X marketers margin, we would expect that for a competitive market, we would the oil marketers should be able to sell at about 10 to 50% markup from that cost. And given that this market is deregulated, that means you don't have to peg your price at anything, that there's competition in the market. We would expect that most, in order to gain a huge chunk of the market share, competitors will try to not overshoot their markup, and that should eventually lead to a reduction, like a slower pace of in price compared to what is currently trading at. So in the long run, we would expect that there will be a decline in diesel prices going forward.
All right, when you say 15%, some persons will want to know, okay, so when you say 15%, how much is that going to be, in monetary terms?
Okay, so yeah, in looking at a markup of 15% on 1,225, it's about 1,405 compared to the 1,450 that Dangote NNPC rather is currently selling at.
Well, compared to the 1,700 naira, it hovered, around in the past weeks. And I'm looking at competition and the principle of fair play. What do you think about this? Are we going to see a disruption that might just change the pricing dynamics in Nigeria? Because you have a manufacturer here who is selling at a particular price. We have other tank depots who is probably selling at some other price. Is there fair play here? Or, I mean, it doesn't matter. What matters is that there is competition and Nigerians are able to get a product, cheaper. After all, you have said that Dangote has the capacity, at full capacity, it can actually serve the Nigerian market fully.
I think it's more of a competition kind of space. And if one of the things that I think will be like a major disruption is if there are fluctuations in the exchange rates. We know that the crude oil prices is globally, is the global stuff and it is pegged to the dollar. And would expect that, if Dangote is buying crude oil to be at $1, just that if he is selling to the domestic market, it will just, convert after doing his cost in dollar, have to convert it to naira to sell to the market. So I believe that a huge risk or a change in the dynamics of price is hinged on fluctuations in the exchange rates. But then we've seen in the recent times that exchange rates has been relatively stable. So we do not in the near term we don't expect any significant disruptions in that market.
All right, so let's talk about, the impact of Dangote entering the energy market and, speaking more specifically, supplying products to the domestic market. Now we've started with AGO, next is Jet A1, and then before we know it, PMS. What's the significance of this and what are the impacts we expect to see, on the economy?
I would like to look at it from three different aspects. I believe, first of all, the recurring fuel scarcity that we usually see in the country should significantly improve, given that there is much there's improved production in the domestic country. Another thing is FX savings. It's something that we believe that would bode well for the Nigerian economy at large. And lastly, I'll be talking about exposures to happenings in the global environment. So in a situation where there are significant disruptions in supply chain, it will not have so much significant impact on us in Nigeria because we have capacity to refine and that in that kind of way we are not exposed to supply chain disruptions.
All right, so talking about, the minimum purchase requirements that Dangote has talked about, which is 1 million liters per marketer. What do you think about this? Don't you think, smaller independent marketers might be financially excluded, or that's nothing to be worried about?
In my opinion, I believe that there is nothing to be worried about. Why I'm saying this is because there are like structures in place for all these independent marketers, like there's the IPMAN structure, like there's an association. So if they cannot buy going alone, they can go as a team or as an association. They can, just ensure that they have a structure around things and they're able to, buy the minimum of 1 million liters per marketer. So I think that they can use that route instead of, just going by themselves, especially if they don't have the funds and capacities to do so currently.
Okay, thank you so much, Bolade Agboola, oil and gas analyst, Chapel Hill, Denham Securities. Thank you for your time on the show.
Yes, thank you.
All right, there you have it, with Dangote selling diesel at 1,225 naira. I mean, between that price and 1,300 naira to marketers. It's expected that at the end of the day, we'll get to buy this particular product cheaper. And that exactly is what many Nigerians are looking forward to. And of course, there are thoughts or there are some talks about the fact that this has actually started permeating into some places and people are beginning to buy diesel at 1,500 thereabout. I mean, it's something that we all prayed for or looked forward to, and now we have it. We'll take a break now. When we come back, we have more conversations for you. Stay with us, don't go away. And now to the much awaited electricity conversation. The Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC, has announced a significant increase in electricity prices for Band A customers. Now, these customers representing roughly 15% of the nation's 12 million electricity users. You want to ask what happened to the over 200 million people will see their rates jump from 66 naira per kilowatt hour to 225 naira per kilowatt hour. Now, additionally, due to not meeting the minimum required electricity supply hours, the Commission moved some Band A customers to Band B. In Abuja, Nigeria, I have joining me Lanre Elatuyi, Electricity Market Analyst. Thank you, Lanre, for joining me today.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
Okay, so before we delve into this conversation, we heard stories of the increase in the price of natural gas, and then a lot of us saw the hike in electricity tariff coming, but maybe not this much, really. What necessitated this increase in gas pricing? I want us to start, from the very foundation.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. If you look at my 2024, okay, let me start from here. Last year, the regulator NERC called all the distribution companies to put in their rate case filing. So filing, and they put in their OPEX, their CAPEX, and what the end user's tariff should be. And NERC actually approved that. So if you look at some of the assumptions and indices used or parameters used in calculating the end user's tariff, one of them is the FX rate, the dollar to naira rate. So the rate used when the present tariff was calculated was naira $19. But we all know today what the dollar rate is. Then apart from that, gas is a very big component in our electricity portfolio, in the sense that about 80% of our generation comes from gas. So the price of gas in the last tariff setting was $2.18. About 2 days ago, we heard the announcement that the gas price has increased from $2.18 to $2.42. So this increase in price of gas, the increase in dollar rate, has necessitated the fact that the generation companies have to increase their cost of production. So the increase of production has gone up. So the marginal cost of generating electricity has gone up. So the gas price is a pass-through cost. The cost has to pass through to the end users.
All right,
so
Larry, let me come in here. Let me come in here. You said something. Did you say 80%?
Yes, about 80% of our generation portfolio is from thermal plants. So we have majorly two hydro plants. Okay, about 3 hydro plants, Jeba, Shiroro, and Kenji. But if you look at our generation portfolio, almost 80% of our generation is from thermal gas.
Okay.
Thermal plants, rather.
All right. Now, let's look at this particular increase. The federal government has increased electricity tariff. However, this is only targeted at some people. That's the Band A users. Help us clarify those who fall within this band and, why this is only targeted at them, so I know if I'm there or not.
Okay, I think we need to commend the regulator for this strategic move. The Band A customers are customers that are on 20 hours and above every day of supply. So what they did was that, taking into cognizance of the realities of the economic, Nigerian economy right now, so NERC felt that not all customers would be able to pay the cost-reflective tariff. So what they've done is to look at customers that are able to pay, those that have the resources to pay. And what they did is to increase tariff for those under Band A alone, while leaving other bands without any increment. So it's a way of cross-subsidization, so that the rich and those that can afford electricity, the true cost of electricity, can actually relieve those who cannot pay for electricity. The alternative is for government to pay subsidy if cost-reflective tariff is not going to be charged. But we all know that government does not have the money to pay subsidy right now. So the only way we can solve this problem is for tariff to be increased. But NERC was wise in their judgment not to increase tariff for every customers, because of the fact that Nigerians are still growing under the pains of subsidy removal of petroleum, and the economy is really biting on Nigeria. So it was a strategic move on the part of the regulator, I so believe.
All right, that's quite interesting. But, moving from over 60 naira to over 200 naira per kilowatt hour isn't something that comes easy. So how are we then sure that some of those people on band A would like to remain on band A? If I'm not comfortable paying that amount, or if it doesn't make business sense for me to pay that amount, where do I go to ensure that, will probably take me down to band B?
Okay, if you're to look at it critically, there's something they call value of lost load. That's the economics of outages. So if I'm not being supplied, if I'm not ready to pay 25 naira per kilowatt hour, what alternative do I have? So that means I have to probably spend more on captive generation, running my generator with diesel, running my generator with petrol. So if we look at it, it's still quite cheaper for this set of customers to still be on the grid. So it makes more economic sense for them to pay 25 naira per kilowatt hour than to go and be spending money on generator or buying fuel and diesel. So I believe some of them will prefer to remain on band A, provided that they get the required number of hours. I think that's what NERC has tried to assure Nigerians that they will indeed get the number of hours they're supposed to get. So I believe personally, if I'm getting
225 naira
every day, I think that's quite fair.
All right, so we're told that the overarching objective of the Commission in the consideration of this tariff application is actually the creation of a financially sustainable electricity market, providing adequate and reliable power supply to drive the Nigerian economy. I'd like you to expatiate on this.
The regulator has dual responsibilities. Number one, to protect the customers, the end users from exploitation. Number two, to encourage investments in the power sector, knowing fully well that power sector is highly capital intensive. So Nigeria currently we're suffering from resource adequacy being impaired. So in the sense that our generation capacity is drilling every day. So in order to encourage more more investors to come into the market, so they need to be sure of the path to cost recovery. Nobody wants to come and invest billions of naira into the power system and they're not sure of recovering their cost. So the liquidity crisis in the Nigeria power sector is so evident to all. So the regulator has to ensure that the investors that are coming to put in their money, number one, they have a reasonable return on investments. Number two, that they actually get a price that is reflective of prudent and actual cost of production. So it's just for sustainability of their businesses that this tariff hike is necessitated.
All right, so does this mean, I'm just looking at all of this, and my question is, does it mean other users do not need stable electricity? Or are we saying electricity is now a luxury? And then I'm curious if we have to ration what is available, which is about maybe 4,000 megawatts or a little above that. I hope those, on other bands will still get at least 5 to 7 or even 10 hours of electricity per day, because there are smaller businesses or even micro businesses that require power, to run their businesses. What happens to these people? Because I'm looking at, if somebody is paying 225 naira, per kilowatt hour, I want to believe that not any hours, and at the discos or, looking at the value chain generally, nobody should give an excuse for giving them anything less than 20 hours of power supply. So if we're going to ration that and ensure that this set of people have 20 hours power supply, won't these other people be affected? And then what happens to their businesses? Because they are humans also, they are Nigerians also. Maybe the crime they have committed is not having enough money to be on band A.
Actually, I agree with you. I think that's one of the fears. Fears and well that every Nigerian is catered for. Energy access, there shouldn't be any partiality for Nigerians to have access to energy. We have a problem at hand, and the problem is quite enormous. If you look at March 24, the average energy generation for 2024 is about 3,000 naira 63 megawatt. Will there be enough for every Nigerian? That's still a question that we're trying to ask. But I know that the regulator is trying everything possible to make sure that every consumer, every Nigerian is actually well treated. So there are concerns, and your concern is quite valid that, okay, is it that the discos will now prioritize their band-aid customers and neglect other consumers? I think the regulator is quite looking at that, and the consumer advocacy group, will ensure that every consumer, every end user at other banks are actually well attended to. Well, that fear exists, but I believe the people in charge are doing something to address that. So it's not as if probably they are not going to be served. They are going to be served. So it's just a way of improving the sector.
All right.
The sector for now is actually troubled.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, I would have loved us to talk about investment in other sources of energy, so we do not just rely on something that isn't really working as much as we want it to, but that will be for another day. Thank you so much, Lanre, for your time on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to know you stay with us. Zambia is making strides towards financial recovery after a 3-year debt default. Following a successful agreement with sovereign bondholders last week, the nation now sets its sights on restructuring an additional $3.3 billion of commercial debt. This move signifies Zambia's determination to emerge from its economic struggles. Joining me from all this is Cesar Cello, economist and managing partner, Equilibria Consulting Limited. He joins me from Lusaka, Zambia. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
All right. So can you elaborate on the progress made with this almost there negotiations with some commercial creditors? Because, I mean, that's what we hear. You know, we're almost there on some and all of that. So what's this almost there all about, really? Are there sticking points with, any specific creditors?
As far as I know, no sticking points. I think almost there basically means there was a sequence. So first of all, the official creditors, a deal was struck, or restructuring agreement in principle, for $6.3 billion. Subsequent to that, I think that was around August of 2023. More recently, the bondholders have agreed in principle to a restructuring deal of $3.8 billion. So out of about $13.4 billion, Zambia is talking about currently agreements in principle of restructuring of $10.1 billion, which is 75% of the total debt stock. So we're almost there, but there's still 25%, which is $3.3 billion that the other private creditors hold, that now needs to be negotiated with in this last stage of debt restructuring negotiations.
All right, I'd like you to elaborate on, the specific mechanics of, how the debt exchange for international bonds will be executed.
Yeah, in terms of bondholders, the bonds, how they are exchanged, I think there's a negotiation that has to further take place that actually ropes in other international financial institutions, such as the World Bank and the IMF, particularly the IMF, in terms of determining within the debt restructuring what debt can be swapped for financing coming from the IMF. As far as I understand, it's a pretty lengthy and complex process, and will require further discussions of 3 parties. Those parties being the Zambian authorities or the Zambian government, the IMF/World Bank on the one side, and then the bondholders, basically honoring the nitty-gritties of the debt restructuring deal. If you check with the debt restructuring deal, there are certain elements from the bondholders that are haircuts, and there are certain grace period, there are certain amounts that have to now be paid. So for those amounts that have to be paid, clearly Zambia is still in fiscal constraint and would look to amortize over a period of time using sort of third funds from the likes of the IMF. So those are I think the debt swaps or debt exchanges that need to now be discussed and take place.
All right, let's talk about this. Looking at the government's effort, what is it doing to address public concerns about the long-term sustainability of its debt levels, even after this restructuring is, done or concluded?
Yeah, I think ahead of the conclusion of the restructuring, first of all, we saw the Zambian government successfully negotiating a credit facility from the IMF, $1.3 billion equivalent. And while compared to the debt stock, that looks like a small amount, any IMF arrangement comes with a lot of benchmarks, including fiscal and debt management benchmarks, benchmarks to show that the country is actually progressing or will progress once the restructuring is done towards a path of debt sustainability. So that's one line that was already done. Along the way, the current administration has, I think, in my view, done a great job in restoring fiscal discipline, fiscal prudency, minimizing borrowing. If you see the fiscal deficits are always lower than targets. So restraint on borrowing, improvements in revenue collections, restraint on excessive spending. Just yesterday, there was a very strongly worded statement from the head of state talking about now that we have achieved debt restructuring, the bulk of debt restructuring, our next responsibility is to ensure that we never find ourselves in such a debt crisis again, by ensuring that we have all the mechanisms, policy mechanisms, legal mechanisms, and others, institutional strengthening to make sure that slippages don't happen, excessive borrowing doesn't happen, some of which in the past was laced with corruption and rent seeking and so on. Those things never happen again because we have all the safeguards in place. So that is something that's already been happening, and the Ministry of Finance has risen to the task of fiscal management, of debt management, but a lot more still needs to be done, particularly that for a protracted period of time, public institutions were really weakened, and at the core of them still have slippage challenges that need to be closed up.
But I like what you said about, fiscal responsibility and all of that. I'm just wondering if this did not happen. I mean, if this conversation didn't start, if we didn't have IMF and all of these other creditors monitoring and ensuring that the process is followed through, would Zambia have, decided to do this on its own? That's on the one hand. And then on another hand, I'm also thinking, after this whole process is done, I hope that this, prudence we now see will continue.
On the first question, Zambia, remember, defaulted in November of 2020. And according to international law, according to international convention, particularly for the bonds, the bondholder debt, that was supposed to be recalled immediately and paid in full. That would have rendered Zambia bankrupt to service any of its debt, to pay back, and it would have taken into course a sort of international arbitration process that would require Zambia to liquidate a lot of its strategic assets. So one way or the other, something would have had to give, and Zambia would have had to come to the table of some painful debt management or debt maneuvering. The saving grace in this case is that we had a political shift, a change of regime, and the new regime was able to win international confidence over and work with the IMF to hold all the different creditors at bay as the negotiations were taking place. Of course, there's an accumulation behind the scenes of interests and so on, but this is all part of the nuances of the debt restructuring deal. Now, on the second question,
if you can do that in less than 30 seconds, very quickly.
Sure, in less than 30 seconds. I think the main things is to put legal safeguards, which the government is doing. So legal limits on borrowing, for example,
Okay.
and then put policy safeguards and put institutional safeguards.
All right.
Once those three things are done, I think it's a done deal for Zambia to be debt sustainable.
Absolutely, institutional and policy safeguards. Thank you so much, Cesar Chelo, economist and managing partner, Equilibra Consulting Limited. Thank you for your time on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me. All
right, and that's it on this edition of Business Edge. Follow us on social media. We are at New Century TV. You can also go to our website, www.newcentury.africa. Thanks again for watching. I am Perpetua Fasanmi-Peter. Bye for now.